And welcome everybody. My name's Helen Oakey. I'm the Executive Director of the Conservation Council. I'd like to welcome you here this evening to our third and final ACT election forum, and tonight's topic is on climate change and urban sustainability. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you can please keep your microphones on mute so that we don't have any background noise in the forum, that would be really appreciated. And also, just to quickly run through the structure of the event, will be that we have sent some questions to the candidates that are here tonight, but we will be taking questions in the chat bar. We'll try to fit in some of those at the end of the session after we've got through the questions that have already been developed. So if you'd like to put any questions in the chat bar as we're going through, please put the word question in front of it in capitals so that Maddie can pull it out and put it into another document where I can see the other questions coming in. As you can appreciate, doing it all remotely makes it all a little bit more challenging for us. So I'd like to start this evening by acknowledging that we meet today wherever we are sitting, most of us on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and acknowledge the contribution that they have made and continue to make to life in our region. By listening to our First Nations people, we can build appreciation of what has gone before us on these lands for many thousands of years. I'd also like to pay my respects to any other Aboriginal people who've joined us this evening and to their elders past, present and emerging. So just to introduce the Conservation Council, for those of you who haven't, I apologise for those of you for whom this is your third forum in the last 2 weeks, and you've heard me say this a couple of times, but I'll just quickly recap. So for nearly 40 years, the Conservation Council has been advocating on behalf of the local environment and also our global environment, because that is where our local environment sits. We campaign in the ACT and the region for a safe climate, to protect biodiversity in our urban and natural areas, to protect and enhance waterways, reduce waste and promote sustainable transport and planning for our city. We seek to influence governments and build widespread support with business and the community to deliver environmental outcomes, putting forward evidence-based solutions and innovative ideas for how we can live sustainably. At a time when we need to reimagine a better future, we understand that the changes that we need will only happen with the collective support of our community. At this, I'd like to take the opportunity just to highlight to those of you who haven't had a chance to look at our website that we've done quite a lot of work around the campaign, and on our website you can find our election priorities document that we developed and released and sent through to candidates at the beginning of the campaign, as well as a number of action sheets and questions that we think that are probably the pertinent questions that people should be asking candidates if you're out and about and meeting candidates at shopping centres or you're attending forums. So do go and have a look at the website, and Kirsten will pop the link into the chat bar for those of you that haven't seen that. She'll actually, Kirsten, yep, okay, Kirsten will do that for us, great. All right, so tonight's conversation is around climate change and urban sustainability. The impacts of a changing climate are well upon us. Increasingly severe fires, storms and droughts are forcing societies and ecosystems to change the way they function. Responding to climate change requires both adaptation, actions to adjust to the changes that have happened and are predicted, and mitigation, actions to avoid and minimise further emissions. To meet the internationally agreed target of limiting warming to 2 degrees globally, we must emit no more than another 95 billion tonnes of carbon globally. At the current rate of 10 billion tonnes of global emissions each year, we will exceed the remaining carbon budget by 2030. Canberra, as one of the world's wealthiest and highest emitting, Australia as one of the world's wealthiest and highest emitting countries per capita, has a clear moral obligation to take strong action to reduce emissions. In 2017-18, the ACT's per capita emissions were 14.2 tonnes. That's nearly 3 times the 2014 global average of 4.9 tonnes per capita. We have a very weighty climate footprint. Canberra has a moral obligation to lead on emissions reductions, and by doing so we can demonstrate how new ideas can be implemented and drive community understanding of the importance of action on climate change across the country and also to other communities around the world. There's no doubt that ACT residents also have high consuming lifestyles. Our waste, yet, is a resource. But until we successfully manage the waste that we generate, it will continue to have significant impacts on wildlife, the environment, and human health. Viewing our waste as a resource means that we should adopt practices which promote a circular economy and expand infrastructure that supports responsible waste and resource management. So, with no further ado, I'm going to introduce the candidates that we have here tonight, and I'd like to thank them very much for attending. I know that polling has already opened this week, but the campaign, it seems, will proceed over the next 3 weeks until the polling closes on October the 17th, which traditionally would be election day, although I do understand they're expecting at least half or 50% of people to vote before we hit that time. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Lee from the Canberra Liberals. Elizabeth is a Shadow Environment Minister and also a member for Kurrajong. I'd like to introduce Mick Gentleman from the ALP, or ACT Labor, who is the Minister for Environment and Heritage and also a candidate in Brindabella. For his first Conservation Council forum, I'd like to introduce Shane Rattenbury, who is a member for the ACT Greens, Minister for Climate Change and Sustainability and candidate in Kurrajong. And also Robert Knight, who is a candidate for the Canberra Progressives in Murrumbidgee. So the format today was we're going to go to our pre-prepared questions that we have. And I am going to open those questions. And then I'm also going to throw to some of our, some of our member group representatives to ask some of the other questions that we have tonight. So I'm going to throw to the first question. Elizabeth, is coming your way first. You got lucky. So the first question is, all parties in the Assembly have agreed to net zero emissions by 2045. Climate science is telling us that high emitting per capita countries like Australia and cities like Canberra need to make deeper and faster cuts to have a chance of stabilising the global climate and keeping temperature increases below 2 degrees. Do you support the need for greater urgency to cut emissions? And if your party forms government, will you commit to expediting actions to reach net zero emissions earlier than 2045?
Thanks, Helen, and thank you to you and the team at the Conservation Council for yet another forum. And this is a very important topic, as all of them have been, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. And hello to everyone who has joined us as well. Thank you for that question. There is no doubt that, of course, we need to do what we can to reduce our emissions, and the Canberra Liberals have supported the plan to zero net emissions by 2045. And we do want to make sure that we all work together. I think that it's very clear that reducing our emissions is extremely important to the Canberra public and the community, and they're on that journey with us, and we need to make sure that we do continue on that journey together. So looking at holistically what we can do in the space of planning, in the space of more trees and green spaces, and in the space of transport and housing is really going to be really important. So we are committed to ensuring zero net emissions by 2045, and in government, if we can look at ways that we can do that any faster, then obviously we will consider those.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm going to go to Shane next.
Thanks, Helen. Yuma. Good evening, everyone. It's great to join you all here online, and thanks to the Cons Council for inviting us tonight as well. Straight to your question, Helen. Yes, the Greens do support the ambition of trying to get to zero net emissions by 2045, earlier than 2045. Of course, we put in place the policy to 2045, but for me, that was always at the latest. And I think with the way we're seeing technological advances, there will be areas where we can cut our emissions much faster than that, and we should have that ambition. I think that is inherent on wealthy cities to lead the path, to show what's possible, and we certainly think the ACT can do that. As you can imagine, for the Greens, this is a key area of focus for us. Our policy document actually says we'd like to try and strive as much as we can to reach zero net emissions by 2030. And we've already released comprehensive plans around the gas transition, electric vehicles, walking and cycling, a just transition to make sure we get there in a fair way, and of course retrofitting existing buildings, and many of those topics will come up later through the evening, so I'll touch on the details of those when we get to them.
Thanks, Shane. I'm going to throw to you, Robert.
Thanks, Helen, and again, thanks for the invitation to be a part of this forum. It's great to be involved. Look, I'll echo the two candidates or the two people who've gone before me and say yes, we fundamentally agree that reducing our emissions is probably one of our top priorities. Obviously, climate change is one of those things that if it's not checked or properly mitigated, is going to cause great calamity for humanity. So I think that as a wealthy country, as Shane's touched on, we've got a duty to lead, and we have the resources, time and energy to be able to do that. We should be developing new ways, technologies to address these things, cutting our emissions. And if we're smart about it, we can develop these things into new industries and sell it to the world. It is a worldwide problem. There's a worldwide market for technologies, ideas and concepts that help reduce our emissions. So I think it's not a case of going lightly and hopefully we don't damage the economy along the way. We do this and we do it smart and leverage the opportunities that come from it.
Thanks, Robert. And over to you, Mick.
Thanks, Helen, and good evening to everybody. Good to be on the forum again. Look forward to spending the early evening with you. I'll go straight to the question. I think Canberra has shown the world that you can grow a sustainable, prosperous city while reducing carbon emissions and combating climate change. ACT Labor's determination and success to move to 100% renewable electricity in the ACT is now driving down your power bills. Most recently, a decline of 2.6% in the cost of the electricity for the ACT and our households, and of course for businesses in the 2021 financial year. And if the Australian government can't act to take effective steps at the national level, it's up to the states and territories to do the work. I think as our city grows, we'll continue being a national and international leader, growing jobs while reducing our reliance on carbon emissions and pollutants that cause global warming. We're determined to grow on our success and drive down emissions even more. And that's why we've got a strong climate platform this election. Amongst the things that we've committed to are supporting tens of thousands of Canberra households to transition to more personally produced and stored renewable energy and significantly reduce their power bills. We've established a $150 million zero interest loan scheme to purchase, solar panels, batteries, high efficiency heat pumps, and encourage households to move away from gas as well. We want to tackle our largest source of emissions in transport by transitioning Canberra's entire electric bus fleet to zero emissions by 2037 or earlier. And we'll buy 90 battery electric buses in the next term, building a new zero emissions bus depot in Canberra's north and building electric bus infrastructure at the new Woden depot as well. Our new schools will be zero net emission schools. Labor has a realistic and properly thought out policy to increase Canberra's urban tree canopy by planting 450,000 trees over the next 25 years. And the urban forest strategy will provide a pathway to achieve our target of the 30% canopy by 2045, while also setting out what we will need to do to ensure our urban forest remains resilient to a changing climate and to help cool the city as well. We'll, of course, continue to pioneer innovations to reduce emissions, transforming our city into a place where innovators come to build the solutions to tackle climate change and support new clean industries to create high-tech jobs across the city. You've seen some of that in my announcements in agri-tech, for example, and advanced technology. We want to help our city and its residents adapt to current and unavoidable global warming and invest in measures to protect our city from more intense and frequent natural disasters, such as we've seen with bushfires. And we'll continue to upgrade ACT government facilities to assist in reducing the number of course, carbon emissions produced.
Great, thank you, Mick. Okay, I'm going to take the next question. Warwick, if you're listening, I've put you down at number 5.
Okay.
Sorry, a bit of logistics there. Okay, so the next question, I'm going to throw this question to Mick first, and it's on gas. So burning gas in our buildings contributes 22% of the ACT's direct emissions. The ACT's climate change strategy has an objective of phasing out gas. Yet over the next 5 years, Evo Energy, which is 50% owned by the ACT government, intends to spend around $35 million of gas consumers' money on new gas connections, including connecting residents in new apartment buildings across the city in infill areas. So this is a two-part question. Do you accept that Canberra must transition away from using natural gas? And as a first step, would you support immediately stopping all new gas connections to the gas network to ensure that new users don't get trapped using a fuel that we know that we need to phase out? Mick,
Thanks,
I'm going to throw to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Well, we need a well-ordered transition away from gas. So we need to chart a course to zero net emissions that also protects jobs and supports industry and businesses through that transition. So ACT Labor wants to make sure the transition works for all Canberrans. Many households currently rely on gas, and we want to ensure that we're well supported and they're well supported and aren't adversely impacted. So we won't risk jobs, particularly at this time of an economic crisis. So gas is still important to some industries and sectors. We also don't want to lock ourselves out of future technology and of course looking across the globe for solutions. There are initiatives like biogas for cooking, of course hydrogen, that are currently being explored. We're taking, I think, a sensible and balanced approach. Where possible, we're providing incentives for people to transition away from gas. For example, those interest-free loans to encourage people to switch to solar hot water heating. In Whitlam, there are incentives available for sustainability, including for not having gas connected. And we're also funding innovation and helping deliver the renewables future. So ACT Labor pioneered reverse auctions for the renewable energy procurement. And this was innovative when we started down this course almost 10 years ago, but it's now the standard sort of across Australia and the world. And of course, we'd like to build on this. In the term of government, we've invested $1 million in ANU's Distributed Energy Resource Laboratory. And lastly, the target of zero net emissions by 2045 that Labor legislated this term is very important. It sets the direction we want to head and allows innovators and the private sector to help us transition. We'll need to be powered almost entirely by clean energy by 2045, and we will get there.
Mick, can I just redirect you to one of the really specific parts of that question, which is about new connections? Because obviously there are some people that, and this is for all candidates really, because I'm going to zero in on this, but obviously there are people who are on gas that we need to transition off. I guess one of the really key issues is around the idea that people are connecting up to the gas network at this stage. Does the ALP have a position around that? And whether or not we should actually stop new people from connecting up to the network in some way, shape or form?
You've seen, I think, historically our support for gas not being connected to houses in Ginninderry. Whilst it is, trunk lines going into the estate, we've supported the transition away from gas. And I'll have to talk to my colleagues to get a position in regard to those apartments that you were talking about earlier on.
Great, thank you. Shane, I'm going to throw to you. Sorry, Shane, you're still on mute.
Thank you. I'll promise I only do that once in the course of this seminar. Look, we've released our gas plan today, and it's a comprehensive strategy to get the ACT to move away from gas supply. We need to stop doing what we're doing if we're going to get to having a zero emission gas city. And the first and easiest thing to do is to stop rolling out gas. So we've made a clear commitment that we want to essentially prohibit the rollout of gas to new greenfield suburbs essentially straight away, as soon as we can get it done. There's no reason to build new suburbs with gas connections. We then, by 2023, want to work with industry to work on new infill development. So we're seeing sites across brownfield sites in the city that are coming in and connecting up to gas, often multi-apartment buildings with 150 or so apartments connected to gas. This is creating problems for the future. So the first step is to stop creating new gas connections. We've indicated we want to put together a $20 million financial support package to help existing buildings switch to all electric. I would note that today that our gas plan has been described as crazy by the Chief Minister, and I think that that is disappointing. I was surprised by that response because it's a very clear strategy to say, let's start with the easy thing, which is let's not connect anybody else to gas going forward. Let's do that. We now can roll out. We've rolled out all electric schools. We've rolled out the CIT is committed to be all electric. The new hospital extension is committed to be all electric. And the Greens have announced a plan to have the new Molonglo Commercial Centre be a gas-free pilot project. These technologies are available to us. They're cost effective, and there is no reason to continue to roll out new gas infrastructure.
Thanks, Shane. I'm going to throw to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Helen, and thank you for that question. I mean, obviously, we've seen new developments like Dairy that are, now developed with no gas, and we'll see how that pans out. There's no doubt that there's obviously gas infrastructure that is still in place, and we can't sort of forget about it because we have an ideological opposition to it. We need to be realistic about how we proceed with this, and we do need to be also mindful of the new technologies like hydrogen and what that involves, and how that will impact the existing infrastructure that we have in place. And in anticipation of your question about new developments, Helen, I'm not in a position to say, give a commitment in this regard about no gas connections, but obviously that's something that will be considered quite a lot by the Liberals.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. And Robert.
Yeah, sure. So we definitely would support stopping any further rollout of the gas infrastructure. In terms of what's already there in a phase-out plan. I am interested in what hydrogen is doing, but as one commentator has already put in the comments here, is that it's a pretty risky strategy to simply hang around and wait for a hydrogen technology to catch up, such that we can simply retrofit it into the existing gas network. So I think it's an absolute necessity to stop rolling this stuff out, and I think the ACT government needs to divest itself of the 50% ownership of Evo Energy in terms of its gas infrastructure. Just as a personal anecdote, when my house was being built 4 years ago, I scratched my head about why there was a gas line going in just for our hot water and nothing else. I don't understand why everything in a household can't be electrified at this point in time. There's no reason for it. It seems to me there's something behind the scenes as opposed to a necessity. There's something behind the scenes influencing the outcome of maintaining ownership or maintaining the rollout of this stuff. It just needs to stop.
Thanks, Robert. Elizabeth, I'm just going to come back to you just to clarify. I heard that your position on the infill. I just wanted to go back and check what the Canberra Liberals' position was on rollout of new infrastructure to suburbs, which is actually something that Evo Energy have pulled back from 2021, primarily because I don't think they think it's financially viable. Would the Liberals be supporting not rolling out new infrastructure to new suburban developments?
Oh, you must have missed me, Helen. I did say that in anticipation of that question from you, that I'm not in a position at this time to say yes, no, or no. But obviously, if it'll be a further discussion and something that's important for us to be discussing into the future about how we make that transition.
Okay, sorry. Yes, sorry. I thought that was about the infill stuff. That's okay. Great. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying. Sorry, muted myself. I'm going to throw the next question to Peter Campbell. Peter is the head of the Electric Vehicle Association, but he's going to ask a fairly general question for climate change for us tonight. Peter, over to you.
Hello. Yes. So I'm representing the ACT branch of the Australian Electric Vehicle Association. Since the bulk of the ACT's direct emissions, around 60% now come from transport, can you outline the specific measures that your party would put in place to begin to drive down emissions from transport over the next decade?
Thanks, Peter. Shane, I'm going to throw to you with that one first.
Transport is our next big challenge, and there is no silver bullet for dealing with transport emissions. We will need to reduce car driving, we'll need to electrify our fleet, we need to improve public transport, which includes further rollout of the light rail network. We need to improve walking and cycling infrastructure. It's about giving people choices that are sustainable for making their transport decisions across the city. For the Greens, we've released a major electric vehicle initiative, which looks at both improving our charging infrastructure and providing subsidies to individuals and businesses and community organisations to bring electric vehicles into their fleet or into their household. We've looked at all the best policies around the world, and those are the ones in the countries that have got high EV penetration. Those are the policies that have made a difference. We want to particularly invest in walking and cycling in coming years. We've made a commitment that at least 20% or 20% of the transport budget or the roads budget should go to walking and cycling infrastructure moving forward. I think the other important thing is to canvass that there's also things we shouldn't be doing. You know, we know that Canberra is a city that is reliant on the motor vehicle, but we need to not be striving to make it easier to drive in the city. We need to be striving to provide better alternatives. You know, I think if we can get to a situation where each household in Canberra just needed one car to serve their household's needs, that would be a real step forward. But I think policies such as duplicating of roads and providing vast numbers of new parking spaces across the city are taking us in the wrong direction.
Thanks, Shane. Robert, to you this time.
Yeah, to try and avoid just simply repeating what Shane said, I'll try to add to it. Yeah, look, the Canberra Progressives is basically, we're almost in lockstep in terms of our transport policy with the Greens. We support the idea that we should be lowering our car dependency. We should be investing in walking and cycling infrastructure. I'll make the point that I think it needs to be really well integrated with public transport. So, you know, investing in rolling out the light rail and electrifying our bus fleet, etc. If we want to lower the use of cars, then we need to obviously make cycling, walking and public transport a very easy option to take for all Canberrans. So that's people who are non-car drivers, etc. So children, elderly, disabled people, all the rest. Another thing that we'd be keen to look at is obviously there's an inextricable link between transport and land use. I think this is probably touching on questions that might come later on, but we need to be looking at ensuring that we're not creating more sprawling suburbia, which is going to lead to more car dependency, which is then making our job even harder of reducing our transport emissions if we aren't able to electrify our fleet overnight. It's not, and that's not to talk about the issue of, you know, electric car dependency is still car dependency. There's a couple more questions to go on that one as well. But yeah, in summary, we very much align with the Greens on this particular policy.
Robert, can I just quickly go to a point of clarification? Sorry, Peter, to interrupt your question and take it off in a slightly different direction. I know you were at our Transport Forum a couple of weeks ago. There's been just a quick request for clarification on the light rail position for the Progressives.
Oh, sure.
Is the position that you support the rollout of light rail across the city Woden first? Can you clarify that for us?
Sure. So we are in principle in support of rolling out the light rail across the ACT as a rolling infrastructure program. That is our stated policy. Of course, we will be interested in making sure that the business case stacks up. So obviously that's the caveat that comes with it. I know that one of our candidates has come out and talked about his dislike of the light rail, but within our party we've made it clear that people can hold a differing opinion to what our actual policy is, so long as they make that clear. So that is our party policy. We do support the rollout of the light rail across the ACT as a rolling infrastructure program.
Great, thanks for clarifying that, Robert. So back to the original question, Elizabeth, I'm going to throw that to you.
Thanks, Helen, and thank you, Peter, for that question. There's no doubt that, as Shane mentioned, I think now it seems like a long time ago, the beginning of this question, that transport is going to be one of the challenges that we face in reducing our emissions. But we need to make sure that once we are committed to doing something with transport, and that includes a lot of the different options that have already been canvassed by a number of the candidates, including improving our public transport and giving different options for active travel, including cycling and walking, that they are sustainable and reliable. Because what we know is that if those options are not realistic or reliable, then people will not take them up, and that will of course push them back into their cars, increasing emissions. So we do need to be careful about ensuring that our public transport and other initiatives for active transport are sustainable and reliable, and that's the main focus. So as you know, the Canberra Liberals have already announced our commitment to building more road-free cycle lanes to encourage cycling within the community, as well as our commitment to making sure that our public transport, our buses, are going to be go to no emissions by 2040.
Just as a further sort of supplementary, as it were, I'm presuming the answer to this is yes from some of the other parties, so I'll just check this with you. If you were elected, would you support the current action plan for transition to zero emission vehicles? So in particular, there's measures to transition the government car fleet over to fully zero emissions, and also ensuring that all the newly built apartments have EV charging infrastructure in place sufficient to, in whatever form, to mean that someone living in a new apartment isn't at a disadvantage relative to an ordinary house. And I guess also just open question, do you have any additional policies that would support the uptake of electric vehicles?
Yeah, okay, so that wasn't part of the prepared questions, so you've just thrown them at me now. But, in terms of our planning policies, that's still yet to come, so there'll be more in this space that we will talk about. And of course, we do need to do more to ensure that we get cars that are more electric, and we will consider all the different options. And I think, there's a lot to be said for the market driving that as well. So we will be open to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We'll throw to Mick.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Peter, for the question. And you can elect the EV council. I'm still hanging out for my Volkswagen ID Buzz 2022. It's supposed to be on the way. ACT Labor, of course, will invest in zero emissions public transport. We will transition the ACT government fleet to zero emissions, and we will invest more in walking and cycling infrastructure to continue to support Canberrans to transition to zero emissions personal motor vehicles. We've already introduced a stamp duty reduction for these vehicles in government. And in government, we've delivered light rail stage 1 on time and under budget, powered by 100% renewable energy. The Liberals opposed the project, with the lead opponent being, of course, Alistair Coe. ACT Labor is the only party with a detailed plan to transition our public transport system to, of course, zero emissions. We've seen the Greens have a comment on this, and the Canberra Liberals, I don't think, have any credible plan. This ambitious transition starts with the re-elected government buying 90 electric buses in the next term, building a new zero emissions bus depot in Canberra's north, and upgrading the Woden depot to cater for electric buses. And having already delivered on our commitment to power the city by 100% renewable electricity, Labor's plan is to continue taking real action on climate change to support the reduction of emissions without putting financial pressure on Canberra households. So our plan is to protect and create jobs by transitioning every bus to zero emissions by 2037. And in this election, only Labor is delivering a transition to zero emissions public transport that has a carefully considered along the infrastructure and skill line to ensure we're required to support the fleet of electric buses as well. So the first 90 electric buses will replace the ageing diesel and CNG fossil fuel buses, and help grow the Transport Canberra fleet. To support these vehicles, a re-elected Labor government will build a fully electric fourth bus depot that will cater for up to 150 zero emissions buses, and will invest $13 million to fit the new Woden depot out with charging infrastructure and workshop functionality that will charge 50 zero emission buses. There's also 64 additional bus drivers that will be recruited from the 2024 to support the running of the expanded bus fleet, and 5 additional technicians. So what we've seen from the Liberals is a commitment of $50 million worth of car parks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mick. I'm going to go to Gary for the next question. Gary, you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Helen.
Over to you.
So my question is about the government's responsible investment policy. The ACT has a target of net zero emissions by 2045, but the existing responsible investment policy does not explicitly exclude investing in fossil fuel or carbon intensive companies in the oil, gas, petroleum, mining and energy industries. The question therefore is, what measures would you take to ensure that public money is not being used to finance fossil fuels?
So I'm going to throw this to you first, Robert.
Look, it's fairly straightforward. Like I said in the earlier question, I think we need to divest ourselves from any public investment in fossil fuel industries or any carbon intensive industries. We need to be focusing on the future, and that means transforming our industry, our transport, our urban development towards a sustainable model. So yeah, the measures that we take that we ensure that public money is not being used to finance fossil fuels, we'd be looking at legislative instruments or policy on basically forcing the government's hand on this. It's a no-brainer.
Thanks, Robert. I'm going to go to you, Mick.
Thanks, Helen. Well, Labor is proud of our leadership, including national and international, to tackle climate change. Our efforts have seen emissions reduced by 40%, and the city's being powered by 100% renewable energy. The ACT Labor government has legislated the aim of achieving zero net emissions by 2045. And to do this, we have developed successive climate change strategies that outline the pathways to this target. The most recent one was the one released last year, and the next emissions reduction target is to reduce emissions by 50 to 60% by 2025. The strategy outlines a range of measures to achieve this target, including the commitment for us to consider the social cost of carbon and climate change adaptation outcomes in all policies, budget decisions, and procurement and capital works decisions.
Thanks, Mick. That procurement thing might come up later by the looks of the chat bar. So, sorry, I've lost my list. I'm going to throw to you, Shane, on this one about responsible investment.
Yeah, thanks, Helen, and thanks, Gary. Look, the Greens have lobbied for many years for both a divestment and an ethical investment approach by the ACT government. And our work did lead to the ACT government's ethical investment framework. And we're pleased with that as a start, but it doesn't go far enough. We now have Treasury using a complicated version of divestment that sees emissions intensity of the investment portfolio reducing over time. We feel the ACT government needs to be more definitive than that. We need a clear pathway to divesting in fossil fuel companies. We should not be using ACT taxpayer money to prop up the fossil fuel industry, and I'm particularly concerned about it from an investment point of view. As we see the devaluing of carbon intensive companies, there's a real risk, there's a financial risk here for the ACT, and so we should be making a orderly and deliberate transition to divest out of these organisations.
Thanks, Jane. And to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Helen. And there's, I mean, obviously no doubt that government needs to play a leadership role when it comes to our commitment to reducing our emissions and making sure that the actions speak louder than words as well. As new technologies come on to ensure that we have the reliable sources of energy that the ACT needs, and that's something that we will obviously look into.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. And for this one, I'm going to throw to Warwick Cathrose from 350.org.
Thank you, Helen. So I'm representing 350 Canberra, which is a community group committed to action on climate change with, in partnership with other groups. And we're seeking to raise awareness, seek more ambitious policy, have a better future for our young people. The question is based on the fact that we think climate change is a fundamental issue that underpins and links to so many different areas of policy development. We've already heard about transport and domestic heating tonight, but you could think about waste, policies on waste, policies on perhaps urban forest, urban density infill, and so on. So the question is, what measures would you take in government to ensure that all decisions and policies take climate issues into account, so that government policies are pulling in the same direction and they may not, preventing any unintended consequences that might lead to emissions increases? So the question is about making sure all decisions have got climate as a factor in them.
Thanks, Warwick. Elizabeth, that one's going to you first.
Thank you, and I think this is a really important question, because I think we do need to be aware of climate in the decisions that government does make, and I think that we do that already in when we look at the Canberra Liberals policies. We've announced about the road-free cycle lanes and our commitment to no emission buses in the public transport fleet. That obviously touches on transport. We think that there is a lot of scope for making sure that we have environmentally conscious policies in relation to planning, and like I said, we'll have more to say in relation to planning later on. But things like permeable surfaces, making sure that we encourage developers to take their environmental credentials seriously when it comes to developments is going to be an important factor. And of course, even in education, we can see. So we've announced, obviously, our Million Trees policy, and including starting a tree planting program in our government schools to ensure that we instill in our young people the importance of looking after our environment. So it is about making sure that we take these practical steps, and having that in forefront of our mind across all the directorates is an important thing.
Thanks, Elizabeth. To you, Shane.
Thanks, Helen. Well, obviously, having been the Climate Change Minister for the last 4 years, I've led the development of the Climate Change Strategy that now sits as ACT government policy. That was a really important strategy because it does a couple of things. It has more than 90 measures that apply right across government agencies. So each minister played a part in signing off on that strategy, and each agency has some responsibility. So I think that really starts to create an integrated approach in government. That strategy, we've also now legislated the interim targets for the ACT. So we've got the 2045 long-term target, but we've got those interim targets. And as I've said in a number of public presentations, and people will have heard me say before, that is really important for making sure we don't just have some goal somewhere in the future, but we've actually got a series of points of accountability along the way that put pressure on ministers as we go, but also on heads of agencies. We've also got 6 monthly reporting to Cabinet on the climate strategy and annual public reporting. So I think all of these things are about putting in place a clear and comprehensive strategy that applies right across government, and everybody plays their part, because that's what it's going to take to reduce the ACT's emissions to being a net zero city. I was pleased to move the motion that saw the climate emergency declared in the ACT. As someone has noted in the chat box, I don't think the ACT government is fully delivering on that yet. There are still policy decisions being taken that are contrary to that. And so we've got a lot of work to do. And I think we're also seeing election ideas being put forward this time that are contrary to that. The Greens have also, through this campaign, committed that we want to introduce the right to a healthy environment into the Human Rights Act. We think that is also another way of really reinforcing the need to act right across every decision that's being taken in government. And we think that that is another opportunity to be clear with government agencies of the expectation that government has.
Thanks, Shane. I'm going to throw to Robert and then to Mick.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Helen. Look, I think with things like this, we obviously need an overarching strategy, and Shane talked about the climate change strategy that we have. I would like to see, you know, real incentives for the government to achieve, you know, this mission of creating a net zero emissions economy in the very near term. To me, that means making it a legal requirement that each element of the government needs to achieve these targets. Now, how we go about that, I'm obviously not the expert in drafting this sort of legislation, but I'd be very interested in working on making it more robust, rather than just a set of targets that if we don't achieve, there's not much of a repercussion. There needs to be legal requirement to try and achieve these things. It's obvious to everyone who's interested and understands the science that if we don't do these things, then we are facing some serious consequences in terms of our survivability on this planet. So, you know, it's kind of a if needs must. Let's get on with it. Let's make it legal requirement to achieve these targets and set the mission and make it binding on the whole government.
Thanks, Robert. Mick?
Thanks, Helen. As well as what we've outlined in the climate change strategy, ACT Labor has also committed in this election to ensure climate change outcomes continue to be considered as part of the government decision making, also in procurements and projects as well.
Okay, thanks, Mick. All right, the next question, we're going to move on a little bit from climate change. We'll come back to it because we've got some questions in the chat bar that we'd probably still like to put to you if we get some time at the end. I'm going to throw to Geoff Robertson, who's got a question. We're moving on to waste. Candidate, sorry, I've jumped ahead and I'm going to come back. Geoff,
okay,
are you there?
Thanks. Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Helen.
Yeah.
Sorry, just as I was anyway, commercial waste and construction demolition waste together comprise more than 50% of waste to landfill. What measures would you take to introduce to improve waste separation and recycling for commercial and building waste, while ensuring that the ACT does not become a dumping ground for interstate waste? This is with particular reference to the large volume of waste processing proposed for Fish Week.
Thanks, Geoff. Mick, I'm going to throw to you first on that one.
Sorry, Helen, just a technical issue on my end. So while commercial waste and construction waste are the largest volume, they also have the highest recycling rate, and recycling these products is, of course, a national challenge for us. So ACT Labor has set a target of 90% diversion of waste from landfill. We've made investments to achieve this objective as well. The national challenge for recycling has been to create markets for recycled products so they don't end up in warehouses or being landfilled. So we've partnered with Icon Water to have glass sent in pipe bedding, and we're working with companies like Downer and Boral to significantly increase the content of recycled material in road base. Up to 100% recycled material can be used. In government, ACT Labor has invested $21 million in improvements in the materials recovery facility at Hume, and we've introduced a waste levy at Mugger Lane to ensure recycling is the preferred approach and to clearly put a tax on material that should be recycled. We've, however, banned waste to energy, and we've heard from the community that the lower order use of waste is not considered something they want to or don't believe in. It aligns with our emissions objectives alongside the climate strategy as well. So we should be clear on one thing, that the Canberra Liberals don't believe in practical measures to support recycling, from attacking the love food, hate waste to, of course, the campaign on the ongoing opposition of the Canberra Liberals to the container deposit scheme, including voting against the legislation that was set up.
Thanks, Mick. I'm going to throw to Shane.
Thanks, Helen. Look, the Greens are really committed to in dealing with these issues. We need to firstly reduce the waste. We need to increase recycling, and we need to build a circular economy as much as we can. I'm excited by the fact that the China soil policy is now in place, because this really challenges this country to think about building these industries and making sure we've got our own processes. We can't just send stuff offshore anymore and sort of forget about it by making it somebody else's problem. Specifically on building waste, we want to introduce a requirement for source separation of construction and demolition waste from 2024. We're also proposing a $1.2 million circular economy grant scheme to encourage businesses, community and startups to trial new approaches to reduce waste, increase recycling and reduce emissions from waste. And we also want to fund and support research and trial programs for addressing problem waste streams, you know, the tricky ones like contaminated paper, timber, textiles, batteries, solar panels, these sort of things that are both existing and emerging problems. We've seen some good examples this term, and there's certainly more to be done in this space.
Thanks, Shane. To you, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Helen. And in relation to, just going to Fish Week first, because obviously that's been a really contentious issue, and the Canberra Liberals have committed to a moratorium on any major waste proposals in Fish Week. We do not believe that they belong there, and we have agreed that we will be open to doing a Fish Week master plan in consultation with the community and the businesses that are there to ensure that that's there. So there is no doubt that that type of proposal is not acceptable to the residents nearby, and we are very, very acutely open to that. In terms of the waste that can be recycled, of course, every measure should be taken to be done so if that is absolutely possible. And we would look at, other aspects that we can do in planning to ensure that we are able to incentivize people to do so. It's interesting that Mick has been able to incorporate, when we're talking about waste in Fish Week and commercial building waste with bottles, but then again, I suppose he always has been irrelevant. Thanks.
I'm going to throw to Robert.
Thanks, Helen. So the measures that we take to improve waste separation and recycling for commercial and building waste, one of the things that I think we don't do enough of in the ACT is adaptive reuse of our existing buildings. There's been one example that I've seen recently, which I think shows how successful that concept can be, and that's the Doma development in Woden with the Alexander and Albemarle buildings. Excuse my pronunciation. So I think that we can look at that end of the spectrum and remove as much demolition waste as we can by exploring that option. One of the things that the Canberra Progressives are very keen on is investing public money in researching new technologies of how we extract resources out of our waste. Obviously, it is a tricky situation when you have those sort of contaminated wastes that Shane did talk about. But there are examples from around the world of where these technologies are in development. Let's use some of the intellectual firepower that this city can bring to bear, and let's look at investing in this industry that we can potentially market to the world. This is, like climate change, a worldwide problem. Waste is a perennial issue that humanity faces. If we can develop technologies where you can drastically reduce the amount of waste you are producing and transform it into a circular economy, that is something that's highly marketable to the world. So that's something that we'd be very, very keen on investing in. Just on the question with the waste facility at Fish Week, we also support the idea of a moratorium on that. And we'd be far more interested in seeing that sort of development happen in Hume, away from residential areas and the sort of light commercial area that Fish Week is becoming. So we'd also be looking at the land use rules and regulations around Fish Week in order to prevent this sort of development application happening in the future as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Robert. Okay, I'm going to quickly go to our next question, which is on plastic, single-use plastics. The ACT government has a draft bill to phase out single-use plastic, or I should say an exposure draft, which has been out for comment, including plastic cutlery, stirrers and polystyrene food containers. But it's clear that we need to do more in terms of tackling the sources of problematic single-use plastics that are difficult to recycle. The question is, will you commit to extend the single-use plastic ban to include all common single-use plastics, including coffee cups, barrier bags, heavyweight plastic shopping bags, takeaway food containers, and controversially, balloons by 2023? I'm going to go to you first, Shane.
Yeah, the simple answer to the question is yes, Helen. We're very pleased to see this draft exposure bill out there, but I think there are other types of plastics to be dealt with. One of the things we think government can do to show leadership is to make ACT government events single-use plastic-free from 2021. That's a proposal we've put forward, and I think that can help then others see what's possible, start to create the market for the alternatives. We do need to work with the various businesses across the city to make this transition, but there is no excuse not to get on with it. We know the clear problem of plastics, and there are good alternatives out there. The sooner we make the transition, the easier it'll be.
Thanks, Shane. I'm going to throw to Robert.
Yeah, again, this is one of the policy areas we'd be pretty similarly aligned with the Greens. We don't support the use of single-use plastics. There are plenty of other options out there that we can be using. I'm interested in what we can do with hemp and bamboo products. However, I will put it out there that I have 2 little kids, and if we ban balloons, I wouldn't be the favourite person. So we'd probably question that one. But the rest of the single-use plastics would be, very much in support of getting rid of those, phasing those out as fast as we can.
Thanks, Robert. I'm going to throw to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Helen. And there's no doubt that obviously single-use plastics do need to go. We do have, and we are starting to get a lot more sustainable options and alternatives to single-use plastic. And where they can be used, they should be encouraged to be used. So, when you look at things like, I think it's almost become habit that, we always have the small plastic bags for fruit and vegetables, and we end up just using it because it's there and it's convenient. And certainly there are different options and alternatives to that. So we see a lot of the businesses who have taken quite a good leadership role in this space and have moved themselves away without the regulations, because it is something that they have started to look into and made a decision about, and that's really pleasing to see. And perhaps there could be a little bit more education and some information sharing as well between those businesses, and that could be encouraged as well. So we would want to see single-use plastic phased out. There's no doubt about that, but we need to ensure that it's a sustainable approach, because of course it needs to be an option that is reliable and sustainable for all businesses as well as the community.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And finally to Mick on this one.
Thanks, Helen. Well, I think Canberrans have overwhelmingly supported strong regulatory action to ban single-use plastics, and ACT Labor is acting. Times have changed, and our community and our government wants to reduce the legacy of plastic waste in our environment for following generations. A re-elected Labor government will introduce the Plastic Reduction Bill 2020 as one of its first acts, and items that will be banned immediately, as you've indicated from the commencement of the legislation, will include plastic cutlery, expanded polystyrene, takeaway food and beverage containers and plastic stirrers. And then 12 months after the legislation, the following items would be banned: plastic fruit and vegetable barrier bags, oxidogradable plastic products, plastic straws, except for people, of course, need them in a physical sense. In the longer term, consideration be given to phasing out other single-use plastic products, including plastic-lined coffee cups and lids, plastic single-use plastic dinnerware, more heavyweight plastic bags, cotton earbuds, and products like expandable polystyrene from containers, of course, are a relic of the past and are banned immediately because they're not sustainable, and there are clear alternatives already available. The ACT will become the only jurisdiction in the country to ban fruit and vegetable barrier bags, providing a 12-month lead in time after the legislation is passed for, of course, supermarkets and grocers to put in place alternatives for that. We won't be proposing to ban plastic-lined coffee cups or single-use plastic dinnerware at this point in time, but we are placing them on the list for future action. In relation to the coffee cups, this is due to the current voluntary swap and go coffee cup scheme being introduced in Canberra cafes this month. In relation to plastic plates, the government is concerned, of course, about some plastic dinnerware alternatives contaminating paper and cardboard waste streams following the COAG waste export ban as well. We've of course recognised that collaboration with the community, local businesses and other organisations will be important during the development and implementation of the legislation, and government plastic busters will be providing information and support for businesses during this transition as well. Labor will continue to advocate for national recognition of regulatory approaches to phasing out single-use plastics, providing a coordinated approach between the jurisdictions.
Thank you, Mick. Right, we're going to move on to the next question, and I'm going to introduce Sarah Reid, who's from ACF Canberra. Sarah, would you like to put the next question to the candidates? And the first person to respond, you can go straight to it, it will be Robert.
Sure thing. Thanks, Helen, and thanks all. It's fabulous to be able to engage with you in this way. Good for democracy. My question is about fabulous food waste. So the ACT government's living infrastructure target of 30% tree canopy and also the Liberals' Million Trees plan also depends on the health of the city soils. Food waste is currently largely going straight to landfill. The most beneficial use of food waste is as compost to regenerate soil and nurture new plant life. So a couple of questions here for you. What food and organic waste services would you support using... Hello, I've got some competition there.
Sit down, listen.
Hello, back again.
Good to go, Sarah.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, look, I'll start that first question again. What food and organic waste services would you support using what processing technologies, and what would the products be used for? And the second question is, how would you ensure the ongoing development of community composting projects should citywide organic waste collection commence? Thanks.
Okay, so yeah, I'll start off with the answer. So in terms of what processing technologies and products, what the products would be used for, look, to be honest, I haven't investigated too much in terms of what the technologies are, but I'm very interested in just simple composting and worm farms such as we see at the Canberra airport. They've done this with their food waste, big worm farms that then go into helping regenerate, as you say, existing plant life. So I wouldn't mind seeing something like that rolled out across the ACT. I understand that we're going to soon be allowing food waste to be put into our green bins, which is then taken off, I assume, to Mugger Tip. But if we can somehow capture that in these types of things like the worm farms at the community level, in the suburb level, if we're able to do that and use that to nurture the new trees that we're planting everywhere, and if it's the Liberals, 1 million. If it's the Labor Party, it will be, I think what we said was 450,000. Then I think that's only a good thing. Of course, you know, encouraging household composting. We do that at our house. We keep all of our food waste in our own composting. So if we can encourage that at the household level to support the growth of individual gardens and whatnot, then that's only a good thing. But definitely this is an area that we can be looking at, particularly as we look towards creating a better urban forest, which obviously will bring its own demands in terms of plant food and nurturing.
Thanks, Robert. Mick.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Sarah. Well, ACT Labor has released a comprehensive plan to recycle food waste through the citywide green bin rollout, and our commitment proposes to use the in-vessel composting as the preferred technology to manage food waste, as opposed to windows or anaerobic digestion. This is a proven technology that manages other environmental risks, like the smell, for example, while achieving the territory's emissions reduction objectives and delivering high quality compost. Our city's future relies on real action. We will tackle on climate change, which will support the reduction of emissions without putting financial pressure on Canberra households, as I've mentioned before. So a food recycling scheme for the ACT will lower emissions from our landfill and provide a more sustainable way for the territory to handle our city's waste as we grow. The citywide rollout of food waste follows on from our successful citywide rollout of green bins in the current term of government as well. And the rollout will include apartments and townhouses so that all Canberrans can receive the service. By rolling out a Canberra-wide food waste collection program, we're providing a new service and helping Canberrans to take real action against climate change. So more than a third, something like 37% of ACT residential red bin contents are food waste, which currently goes to landfill and turns into methane, which of course we know is a problematic greenhouse gas. So by managing food waste through this system, we will reduce ACT emissions from the waste sector by about 30%. Up to 200 new jobs will be created through the scheme as part of ACT Labor's plan to protect local jobs during this uncertain time. And of course, Labor is an experienced, progressive government and has a track record of delivering on our promises. So to roll out the new service effectively, a re-elected ACT Labor government will trial the collection of the service before the full citywide scheme is put in place. Now more than ever, of course, we need a government that has a proven plan to take action on climate change and reduce power bills to ensure a better future for our city. And we'll look at the opportunity for, of course, those community composting opportunities too.
Great, thanks, Mick. I'm going to go to Shane and then Elizabeth. Shane, you first.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It's a really good question. We need to see our food scraps as a resource and not simply something that gets sent to waste. And that's the other thing that really needs to be thought about in this space is the fact that there's a real problem of food waste overall. Uneaten food waste, so many resources, whether it's land, water, transport, refrigeration, packaging, all these things that goes into food. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, with the community, talking to them about issues of food waste. On specific initiatives, we certainly support the implementation of a full food and garden waste collection service by 2023, including for apartment buildings. We shouldn't leave those out of the equation. We do want to continue to deliver the Love Food, Hate Waste education program, which also tackles that issue of food waste. We want to particularly make sure that the large waste producing businesses have a separate organic waste collection and food waste reduction plan from 2023. Those big places like food courts, the convention centre, commercial kitchens, those sort of things. It's not just about households, it's also about those big commercial producers. We obviously need a organic waste processing facility that needs to be part of the forward plan. And we also want to investigate the potential for requiring large food retailers to donate edible food to charities and ensure that food unfit for human consumption is used as animal feed, so that we don't just waste food, we actually look for the highest order uses of those valuable food resources. In terms of ongoing development of community composting projects, look, I've really championed the community garden grant program, and a lot of those grants do go to composting projects. So there's some really good ones out there already, and I think you can't go past a bit of local composting, because it not only keeps the resources local, but it also really builds community connection as people work together on these projects, particularly around things like community gardens.
Thanks, Shane. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Sarah, for that question. It's a really good one, and I think it's important to note that it was really disappointing that the current Labor government missed a golden opportunity actually to incorporate food waste and organic waste when they rolled out the green bin scheme. I also note that the ACT is signed up to or has agreed to the National Action Plan in managing food waste, and the Canberra Liberals government will of course honour that as well, because we do, as has been discussed, it is not just a problem that's unique to the ACT, so we do need to all work on that together. The Canberra Liberals will be committed to ensuring that we bring out, roll out food waste collection, curbside food waste collection services across all of Canberra. We also have announced our support for community gardens and also the community composting initiatives that are taking place. For an example is a great one that's happening in my own electorate of Hackett, where Capital Composting is obviously doing a huge amount of great work, and not only in terms of the actual composting work they do, but it's also about educating and encouraging the community about the importance of it. And I think that's really, really important too. So it is about ensuring that we in government would support those types of initiatives as well.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think Brooke's on the line, so you should be happy to hear that. Okay, now we're running down the clock a little bit faster than I had expected at this stage. So I'm going to ask the candidates if they'd be happy to keep their answers to 1 minute and go quite quickly so that we can crack through some of the questions that we've received on the chat bar. We have probably 4 or 5 substantial questions there, and we have a couple of others that we haven't got to yet. I'm just going to pick one last question from the pre-prepared questions. Mick, I'll throw to you to open this one. And I think Gordon McAllister, who's one of our board members, is on the line there. And Gordon's going to ask this question. So Mick, I'll throw to you first, and then to Robert, and then Elizabeth, and then Shane. If you can just try to respond as quickly as you can, that would be great, so that we can get onto some questions from the floor. Thanks so much.
Okay. I'll ask my question now on urban sustainability. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, just on urban sustainability, and obviously the issue there is the growth of the city, which comes up often in debates. Now, the ACT's population continues to grow, and I was looking at the statistics, and apparently the projections are that we'll be growing at 1.3% on average into the future, which if you do the sums by 2045, we'd have about 600,000 people living in the ACT. Now, that obviously creates a challenge for achieving our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, because we've got to find more renewable energy. We're going to be generating more waste. There's all that construction activity. And we've got to find places for these people to live. So I'm just wondering, we have the situation that we need new housing for these people, but we also know that if we continue with urban sprawl, we have impacts on the surrounding woodlands and grasslands that have ecological value. And also the further out we go, we're going to have more transport demands and potential for more traffic congestion. So I want to know if you think the population of Canberra is going to keep growing, what is your position on keeping Canberra as a compact city? And will you support no further expansion of the urban footprint after the current greenfield sites are completed at Molonglo, West Belconnen and Gungahlin? And I guess supplementary, if you do think the city should keep growing outward, where would be the next development front after those areas?
Thanks, Gordon. Well, look, I was thinking about this question at last week's forum as well, and I think Joe made the Greens position very clear, and Labor's party position on this is very clear as well. We've got a 70% infill target and a 30% greenfields target. This was based, of course, on the extensive work that we put during this term into the planning strategy, and the strategy was based on consulting with the whole Canberra community. We know the need over the next few decades. We'll see around 100,000 new homes. Our target means that 70,000 will come from infill and 30,000 will come from greenfields. Without this target, the urban footprint of Canberra will need to double. So this is unsustainable, costly, it's reckless, and we need to see many beloved areas around Canberra lost, I think. So we've also explicitly pledged no development in Cohen Forest or west of the Murrumbidgee, in contrast to the Canberra Liberals. And last week we really didn't get an answer from the Canberra Liberals. So I think what we need to hear very clearly tonight from the Canberra Liberals is, do they endorse the 70% infill and 30% greenfill development? And if no, What is the target, and where are the areas, as you're suggesting, Gordon, that they will develop? You know, this election is crucial for the future of our city. It will be close, down to a handful of votes, and the Liberals believe they can get into government by winning the third seat in Murrumbidgee at the cost of the Greens and helping the Belko party get a seat. This means this election, the future footprint of Canberra is in play, and we need to know where they stand.
I might go second there, Helen. That's all right. Look, the Canberra Progressives are very much against continued urban sprawl, and I think personally, I think that we probably need to look at an urban growth boundary. From north to south, Canberra has the same geographic footprint as Hornsby to Liverpool in Sydney, with 1/10 of the population in that area. We're one of the lowest density cities in Australia, and we've grown this way through the concept of this garden city that was sort of populous through the 20th century. The modern phenomenon of a sprawling suburbia is a 20th century thing that's been allowed by hypermobility, car-based transport, and we know that this is highly, not just environmentally unsustainable, but it's also economically and socially unsustainable. It's an isolating form of urban development, and as much as we can towards the future, we should be looking towards that missing middle. Urban development, medium density, high amenity, transit oriented and walkable sort of urban development. That I think is the future, and we need to stop building further out into the outskirts of our city and destroying the biodiversity on the periphery.
Thanks, Robert. Elizabeth, you've been given a challenge there as well.
Thanks, Helen, and I have no interest or in responding to Mick at all, because he clearly thinks he knows what the Canberra Liberals are thinking. In terms of, and I think we discussed this topic last week, and there's no doubt that the trajectory is that Canberra is growing, and we want to make sure that we find that balance. Canberrans do care about their environment, and the importance of biodiversity to our region is on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. But we also know that Canberrans want choice when it comes to housing. So we do need to find that balance, and I'm confident that we can find that balance. It is about ensuring that any further development is done in a sustainable way, and that's what we'll be wanting to do.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Shane. Yep, thanks.
Sorry, Helen. We absolutely support having a more compact city. We cannot keep spreading outwards. Sprawl leads to more driving, more traffic congestion, more air pollution, the loss of our remnant grasslands and woodlands, and transport poverty. All of these things are the result of that. So we do want to have a more compact city, but we also need to retain some of the key things about Canberra that we love. And so that makes our urban reserves, our urban parks more important than ever. As more people live in these areas, our parks and green spaces become people's backyards. So we also have a duty to make sure we look after them better. I think we've demonstrated our commitment to trying to transform the nature of this city away from being a freeway-based, car-dominated city by doing things like building light rail, which become the backbone of making a more compact and a more walkable city. So they're the sort of projects that we need to put in place. And we need to make sure also that we change the planning rules so that we don't simply see everywhere being concreted over, that we do have things like the 30% permeable surface target that I've brought in this term as in my ministerial portfolios, to make sure that as we do have a more compact city, we also combat the urban heat island effect, so that people can live more compactly, but in a way that is climate ready as Canberra has a hotter and drier future.
Thank you, Shane. Okay, I'm going to move on to a bit of a rapid fire section for questions from the floor, because we haven't got to any yet. So the first question from the floor is that what measures do candidates propose to take in the next 4 years to support a just transition to net zero emissions, especially in terms of ensuring low income households aren't left behind? So I'm going to start with Elizabeth on that. And I am going to put my clock on, Elizabeth. So if you see me do a little time thing, I'm just trying to keep tabs on it. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. There's no doubt that, and I've said this before, that there's a lot of the things that we can do in the planning space when it comes to ensuring that we develop policies that will drive down our emissions, and that is going to be one of the key factors that we look into. So, you know, we've talked about, and some of the other candidates have also talked about, ensuring that we have a certain amount of permeable space, ensuring that, you know, the construction waste goes into a bit more recycling, and all of those types of issues, and they're very, very practical matters that we will need to look into. And of course, the other space is in transport. We've already had a discussion about.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm going to go to Shane.
Yeah, Helen, we've released a specific just transition policy, which is available on our website. And in the spirit of brevity, I won't go into the details. People can see it there. But look, it is about making sure that we provide subsidies for households to transition from things like gas to electric for those that can't afford the upfront costs. It is about basic things like ensuring rental properties meet minimum energy performance standards. That is not only an important environmental outcome, it's a really important social outcome. Even things like our electric vehicle policy are about creating a market so that then there are second-hand electric vehicles available for people who don't have the money to buy such expensive cars. So right across the board, we need to be thinking about how do we make the transition to a zero-emission future without punishing low-income households.
Thanks, Shane. Robert?
Thanks, Helen. I apologise. This is actually my daughter's room and they're a bit loud in the background. If you hear that, please forgive me. Yeah, in terms of a just transition, we've got, the things that I'd be considering are, you know, the two major costs of living. So one is housing, the other is transport. If we can create new housing and drive the cost of housing downwards, or at least keep it level, and look at affordable housing, social, including public, social, and community style housing, which is built with eco credentials, and then look at our transport and changing that towards sort of, you know, more electrification, more use of active and public transport, driving down emissions that way. I think that this is how we look at a just transition. So I'd be exploring those avenues.
Thanks, Robert. Mick?
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, I think if we look at, you know, a good example is the zero interest loans, and then 1,200 public housing dwellings being climate friendly are just two areas we're looking at. We'll have more to say about the support that we're going to provide for vulnerable households as well. But a just transition is also about providing support and pathways for workers to transition into the new economy we're building as well. So we've also announced programs for this too.
Thank you. My next question, I'm going to go Shane, Robert, Mick, Elizabeth. And the question is on organic waste depots provided within walking distance of residences rather than curbside collection for transport to a large depot. I guess the question is whether you give consideration to this model in terms of the organic waste collection. So Shane, Robert, Mick, and then Elizabeth.
I think it'll certainly be an option for some communities, but the reality is some people just won't participate. And so having that sort of centralised collection model that makes it particularly convenient for people is probably a pathway we have to explore as well.
Yeah, so my response to that is, I know that there will be, as Shane touches on, there will be people that wouldn't like to participate in it, but if we can create tailored solutions at the community level, at the suburb level, we don't need to have a highly centralised model in this. If we've got community gardens, community composting arrangements, then we can have a tailored arrangement. I think I don't think that we need to have this centralised, it all goes to a central place sort of model necessarily.
Well, Helen, we've committed, of course, to the food waste household collection via the green bins. This is a successful model, as I've said. It includes apartments too, which is really important, I think. But we'd be happy to talk to the community about any other opportunities.
Thanks, Helen. And I actually have to say I agree with Robert on this, because even though we have obviously announced our commitment to the curbside road collection, there is obviously a very important role for community gardens and composting organisations to play, and that's why we have announced our policy to ensure that we support those initiatives.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, one last quick, I think we can fit in one more quick rapid fire question. I'm going to go to Robert, then Mick, then Elizabeth, and then Shane. I'm just quickly rotating. And the question is around sustainable procurement policy. Will you tighten up the ACT government's sustainable procurement policy to prevent contracts being awarded to companies that have significant involvement in the fossil fuel industry? And in particular, will you make sure that no new contracts are awarded to BMD, an engineering and construction company that is helping to build the rail for the Adani coal mine in Queensland? And I think probably the spirit of the question is all other companies that have been involved with those kinds of projects in other places. So this question, yeah, Robert first, then Mick, Elizabeth and Shane.
What a curly question. Look, as a public servant myself, I'm really hesitant to try and put on yet another layer of corporate governance onto our line public servants, who are the people who are making these sort of procurement decisions day to day. I think it'd be a very, very difficult question to ask them to vet a company to find if at some point in their history they've been responsible for supporting, like the example you gave, supporting the building of a rail line in support of Adani. I'm not sure that is a level that we need to go to. Sure, we need to make moves towards a more sustainable economy, but this is something I would probably look closer at. I'm not convinced. I'd be looking closer.
Thanks, Helen. I think I've already said procurement policy is something that we'll look at. I would note that the changes made in the government's responsible investment policy have seen investments in listed companies dropped where they're included in global industry classification standards for, coal and consumable fuels, where the mining of coal is a key activity and where the companies have a high carbon intensity in their business operations.
Thanks, Helen. I don't think I have much further to add than when we discussed this topic a little bit earlier, except to say that I think Robert's just made a good point in relation to some of the, I suppose, the unfair burden on public servants when it comes to this type of thing, and that's something that we need to look at and find a balance on.
And just last but not least, I think that there is a real opportunity for government to use its buying power, its investment decisions, its procurement policies to send very clear signals. It's, the ACT can do something. We have a responsibility to deal with our own house when it comes to climate change, but we can also use our influence to exert pressure to get better outcomes. And something like the Adani coal mine is just not compatible with a sustainable future, with a climate safe future, and we should certainly send the signals where we can.
Thank you all. I think that's probably, we might need to wrap up the questions at this stage. I did offer the candidates a quick opportunity to wrap up if they would like to make a quick wrap up statement before we go. It is 7:02, so you might want to go and have dinner, but if you're open to it, I will ask you can make a quick wrap up statement and then we will end the event. I'd like to thank all of the participants for their questions, and I'm really sorry we didn't get to all of those, but hopefully we did cover them in some of the pre-prepared ones. So perhaps I could throw to Robert first for a wrap up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Helen. And look, I'm hoping that I've impressed upon your interested listeners that the progressives really are about a forward progressive vision. We're about setting goals and having a mission, and really moving forward. We're not left, we're not right, we're forward. That's who we are. If people are interested in breaking the status quo, if you don't like the Coles and Woolworths being Labor and Liberal, and the Independent Grocers Association being the Greens are not for you, then look for these small operators for a real decent change in our politics. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. I'll go to Shane next.
Thanks, Helen. Look, when it comes to dealing with climate change, we need courageous choices and real leadership. Clearly, business as usual will not cut it. We saw over the summer the fact that Australia is not immune from the consequences of climate change. We must all play our part. We need to both reduce our emissions and also get underway with adaptation. For the ACT, transport and gas are our big challenges. That is where we need to really focus our policy efforts. And when it comes to adaptation, getting more trees planted in the city, green walls, green roofs, making Canberra a biodiversity haven for species that will be impacted by climate change. These are all the areas we need to focus on. I think the Greens have shown our ability to influence government. Canberra is a world leader when it comes to climate action. We are an elite company, but we cannot rest on our laurels. We have much more to do, and I think we are very deeply committed to making that change.
Thanks, Shane. I'll go to you, Mick.
Helen, in the ACT, we're lucky to have a vast amount of nature at our fingertips, from our beautiful nature reserves to our wetlands, urban green spaces, and the national parks. Facing up to the ongoing challenge that is climate change and the threat of bushfires, as Shane just indicated, as the bushfire seasons grow longer and prove more challenging, we've got a lot of work to do to protect our environment. And we are a small jurisdiction, but we're proud of being able to take the lead in environmental issues and set the standard for the rest of Australia. ACT Labor hasn't just talked about protecting the environment, we have acted. And I think we're an example of how you can grow your economy and be sustainable at the same time. You know, we're now powered by 100% renewable electricity, and that achievement, of course, belongs to my predecessor, Simon Corbell. I may have started it with the feed-in tariff, but he certainly drove the effort there. And he had to stare down, of course, the Liberal Party's opposition to renewables. And by doing this, ACT Labor helped keep the renewables going at a time when Tony Abbott was really trying to strangle it.
Sorry, I'm not even muted. Sorry. Thanks, Mick. Elizabeth, final word for you.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. And can I say also a huge thanks to you. It's not easy, you know, sort of facilitating these types of things, and the fact that you've done 3 of them also is hats off to you and to the Conservation Council and your team for putting these on. I think they're really important. There's no doubt that Canberrans are passionate about our environment. We all are, and we want to see a positive change for the future. The Canberra Liberals are committed to ensuring that we have a sustainable future for all Canberrans. We want to make it the best place to live, work and raise a family, and that means that we need to drive down our cost of living, and it means that we need to take real and practical solutions to protecting our environment. You already know about our Million Trees policy, but of course we've also announced policies to support the community groups that are doing so much for our environment. ACT Wildlife, Land Care, catchment groups. You know, I talked all about the support that we want to give to local composting and recycling initiatives, and they're real practical solutions that we can all play a role in to ensure that we create a sustainable Canberra for future generations.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so I'd like to wrap up with that. Thank you so much. As you're all aware, voting opened yesterday, so we've had 2 days of pre-poll voting. I'd like to thank all of the candidates for their time. It's an exhausting time to be attending all of these forums, and I know that this is just this is just one out of many that you've probably been to over the last few weeks, and you may still have many more in your diaries. So we really appreciate the time that you've taken to brief the Conservation Council community, all of our member groups. We've had around 100 people at all of these events, and we've also recorded them. So it's been great to extend that reach and for people to be able to listen to, sorry, I've got messages coming in at me. People be able to listen to what your thoughts are about these issues. I just wanted to quickly take the opportunity to spruik a new project that the Conservation Council launched about a month ago, which is an issue that's close to our hearts around climate change, which is our Make the Switch website, which is a website that actually helps Canberra households from transitioning from gas to all electric households, where they can put their numbers in, put their data in and get their energy savings on their bills and also their emission savings out. We're really proud of that work, and it was really exciting to launch it a little while ago, and we'll be doing some more workshops around that with people from different parts of Canberra, talking to them about how they might be able to get energy savings on their bill and do a good thing for the environment. I'd also like to spruik our online spring dinner, which is online, but we will deliver dinner to your house for your gathering of however many people you can safely fit in your venue. And that is on November the 7th, and tickets are now on sale. So we're very excited about that. We have Costa is still speaking, and we will have choir will be performing, and we'll have all sorts of other things going on, such as the ACT Environment Awards. The awards will be opening soon. So for those people who are from the Conservation Council member groups, please give consideration to who you might nominate from your member groups for an Environment Award this year. We have Environmentalist of the Year, Group of the Year, and Young Environmentalist of the Year as well. So on that note, I'm going to wrap up. I'd like to say a big thank you to my staff, Maddie Clegg, who is in the black there waving, and Kirsten Duncan, for all of their support over the last few weeks. This has been an intense process, organising and facilitating these events, and they've been absolutely stoic, working overtime repeatedly. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And also thank you to members of the Conservation Council community who've worked with us on our election working group, helped us with our thinking, with our policy work, and with developing and also asking the questions. A big thank you to all of you for the input that you've had over the last few weeks. We wish all the candidates well. We hope you get a little break after the election. I'm sure you may not get a break after the election, depending on the outcome and how it looks. We certainly hope you get a break over Christmas, if not before then. And thank you very much for participating, and we will now wrap up this event. Thanks again.